right, class. So here we are in chapter 3, where we'll talk a little bit about ecosystems. And I'll briefly cover these topics and energy, but you'll need to probably read through the textbook and study some of this on your own as well. So we'll talk kind of through this as our overview, and we'll jump right into the Chesapeake Bay salt marshes. They are an example of an ecosystem called an estuary, which is a semi-enclosed body of water where fresh water will drain into the ocean. One of your discussion questions will talk about this, I believe. Tidal means you have a gradual change from fresh to salt water. Cordgrass will dominate, and this is a home to insects and birds and a nursery for fish, and it's a very important buffer for coasts against storms, these estuaries. Ecology, L-O-G-Y, means the study of, and eco means house. So literally, ecology is the study of one's house, and specifically the study of interactions among and between organisms in their abiotic environment. Biotic means living environment, which includes all organisms, and abiotic means the non-living or physical environment. So the living, it includes living space, sunlight, soil, precipitation, etc. So when organisms interact with biotic components, but also affect many physical and chemical processes, this is where we get ecology. Physical is walking on the soil, and chemical interactions are interacting with carbon dioxide, oxygen, and other wastes. Ecologists are interested in the levels of life above that of an organism. So, if we're looking at the relationships between organisms and communities and ecosystems in the biosphere, that is where we get to ecology. Some ecology definitions that are important: species is a group of similar organisms whose members freely interbreed to produce fertile offspring. A population is a group of organisms of the same species that live in the same area at the same time. Community is when all the populations of different species that live and interact in the same area at the same time. An ecosystem is a community and its physical or abiotic environment, and the landscape will be the several interacting ecosystems, like a bear hunting for salmon in the river or living in the adjacent forest. So part of the earth that contains living organisms is the biosphere. The community and the physical environment is the ecosystem. All populations of species in an area are the community. A group of the same species is a population, and individuals are the organism. So coral reef communities are similar to rainforests for the number of species and the productivity. They are threatened with climate change, and how can communities be protected from warming waters, and what could loss mean? These are some questions we will answer. The biosphere contains Earth's communities, ecosystems, landscapes, and includes the atmosphere, which is the gas enveloping the surrounding Earth, the hydrosphere, which is Earth's water supply, and the lithosphere, which is the soil and rock of the Earth's crust. So here we have the atmosphere is the gas, the lithosphere is the rock and soil, and the hydrosphere is the water. The energy of life, so the ability or capacity to do work gives energy of life. We have chemical, thermal, mechanical, nuclear, electrical, and radiant solar energies. The radiant and solar energies are shown here as the visible light, but all of these energies are, energy means the ability or capacity to do work, and we have all these different kinds of energies. Solar radiation is the primary source of energy on the planet because plants use solar radiation into food. Energy can exist as potential or stored energy, or kinetic energy as the energy of motion. So for example, potential energy is converted to kinetic when the arrow is released from the bow. Thermodynamics is the study of energy and its transformations, where a system is the object to be being studied. A closed system does not exchange energy with the surroundings. This is very rare in nature. In nature, we more have open systems which will exchange energy with the surroundings. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change from one form into another. The energy absorbed, so for example, energy is absorbed by water in the plate, but not actually lost, as shown in this example. The second law of thermodynamics states that when energy is converted from one form to another, some of it is degraded to heat. So heat is highly entropic, meaning it's very disorganized, and water in the sunlight will get warmer And the engine will convert chemical energy of gasoline into mechanical energy inefficiently. So this is a look at the second law of thermodynamics. Photosynthesis is a biological process by which energy from the sun, radiant energy, is transformed into chemical energy of carbohydrate or sugar molecules. So we take CO2, water, and radiant energy, and then the chlorophyll in the plants will turn it into sugar, water, and oxygen. Cellular respiration is the process where the chemical energy captured in photosynthesis is then released within cells of plants and animals. So we take sugar, oxygen, and water to create carbon dioxide, water, and energy. And this energy is then used for biological work in organisms. So here we see photosynthesis and cellular respiration, which make up our cycle. Photosynthesis uses carbon dioxide and water and light to make glucose and the needed materials and will give off oxygen. The needed materials that it creates are sugar and other molecules that store chemical energy. And then cellular respiration takes that sugar along with oxygen and water, giving off chemical energy to do work and heat to create CO2 and water. And we make this cycle that involves photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Life without the sun, what would that be like? In 1970, the hydrothermal vents in the deep ocean were discovered, which contained water up between 200 and 200 degrees Celsius, or about 392 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a rich ecosystem supported without light, and bacteria performed chemosynthesis, which was similar to photosynthesis, but used chemical hydrogen sulfide, not sunlight, to do this work. Here's the energy flow and the passage of energy through an ecosystem, showing, for example, how energy enters the ecosystem from the sun, and then energy flows linearly in a one-way direction through ecosystems, where we have a first tropic level are the producers, which produce food. For the second tropic level are the primary consumers. We have secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, which are kind of the top of the food chain, and then the decomposers, which help to degrade all the waste material. So energy will always exit as heat lost, usually in the form of waste. So then we get into food chains. This is the path of energy flow, where energy from food passes from one organism to another based on their tropic level, which is an organism's position in a food chain, which is determined by its feeding relationships. The first tropic level are the producers, those are the plants. The second tropic level are the primary consumers of those plants. The third tropic level are the secondary consumers, and then the decomposers are present at all levels. Autotrophs are the producers. Auto means self, and tropho means nourishment. So these will produce their own food from inorganic material. Example, plants via photosynthesis, or those hydrothermal vent bacteria via chemosynthesis. So those are the autotrophs, the producers in that first tropic level. The heterotrophs are then the consumers. Hetero means different, tropo means nourishment. So these will use bodies of other organisms as food. Omnivores eat both plants and animals. The consumers of detritus are the detritivores, will eat dead material like leaves, carcasses, and feces like crabs, worms, millipedes, and snails. Decomposers, or the saprotrophs, sapro means rotten. These will break down dead organic material and release inorganic molecules like CO2 and nutrients that producers can use. So like fungus and bacteria are decomposers, and they are involved in all aspects of the food chains. So then we get to this idea of a food web, which visualizes feeding relationships within a community. It's much more complex than a chain, but it's still rather simplified compared to what actually happens in nature. So we don't kind of have this food chain. It's more like a food web, where we have many types of producers, which will produce food for primary consumers. Then we have secondary consumers, and eventually the top of the food chain. We see decomposers in all aspects of it to kind of make up this food web, rather than a food chain, which will help to visualize these feeding relationships within a community. Humans and the Antarctic food web. The base of the web is the algae, which is eaten by krill, Krill are eaten by many larger organisms, and the wastes of whales will resupply the nutrients for algae and krill, but ozone and climate change can create a warming area. Graphically, an ecological pyramid will represent the relative energy value at each trophic level, and it's an important feature that shows the larger amount of energy is lost as heat between trophic levels. And there's three main types of ecological pyramids: the pyramids of numbers, biomass, or energy. So a pyramid of numbers illustrates the number of organisms at each trophic level, and we have fewer organisms occupying each successive level. So for example, the top level, we will have fewer individuals where we'll have many producers at the bottom. It doesn't include the biomass of organisms at each level or the amount of energy transferred between levels. The pyramid of biomass illustrates the total biomass at each successive trophic level. Biomass is the measure of the total amount of living material. There's about a 90% reduction in biomass through the trophic levels. And then the pyramid of energy illustrates how much energy is present at each trophic level and how much energy is transferred to the next level. So the most energy will dissipate between trophic levels, and it will be lost as heat and energy to maintain each level. And this explains why there are so few trophic levels. Ecosystem productivity is shown by what we call the gross primary productivity, which is the total amount of energy that plants can capture and assimilate in a given period of time. Cellular respiration is when plants use some energy of the GPP to maintain themselves. Plants will respire too. And then the net primary productivity is the productivity after respiration. Losses are subtracted. This is what is available as food for other organisms. GPP is kind of similar to your gross pay in a paycheck. R is similar to taxes, and the NPP is similar to the take-home pay. So that kind of helps you kind of put this into perspective, where the net primary productivity, for example, plant growth per area per time, is equal to the gross primary productivity, the total photosynthesis per area per time, minus the plant cellular respiration. Variation in NPP is by ecosystems. We have algae beds and reefs versus extreme desert and rock. So coral reefs are near tropical rainforests. Humans consume a large amount of global NPP, 30%, but we make up, and this represents a threat to the planet's ability to support both human and non-human inhabitants. Humans use a large portion, and if we use more biomass as energy rather than fossil fuels, our NPP may increase, so we need to learn how we can balance our needs with other organisms. A little bit in the Enviro News, the use of satellite imagery helps to improve biomass estimates of forests by helping protect tropic forests in developing countries, and developing countries to pay to keep forests intact, but we need to ground truth satellite models with monitoring data from the forests themselves. So that's a little bit on Chapter 3, ecosystems. We'll see you for Chapter 4. Thanks for listening, guys.